So there is devastating, just devastating new evidence in the Trump-Ukraine quid pro quo fiasco. And it is really important to understand what we mean by evidence. And I think this is really worth doing. So I'm going to focus on that element today. And I hope that this is useful. There is new testimony under oath from the United States envoy to the Ukraine, who says that, listen, the story we've been getting publicly is true. Donald Trump indeed made the security aid, hundreds of millions of dollars in security aid to Ukraine, contingent on, dependent upon Ukraine publicly saying that they were going to carry out this politically motivated smear investigation against Joe and Hunter Biden. That is, as a fact, not very surprising to people in my audience, I presume, who have been following the story. But this is the really important part that I want to focus on today. If we go back to the Russia probe and carry through to what is going on now with Ukraine and the impeachment inquiry, the Trumpist right has insisted time and time again that there is no evidence that everything that there is in the Trump-Russia probe with the Ukraine fiasco, it is hearsay and people's baseless allegations. And this is why we have to be just super crystal clear here, because unless we are prepared to address this farcical claim, they're going to get away with it, okay? Testimony under oath is evidence. Now, there is a difference between evidence and sort of caught red-handed, irrefutable proof. But before we even get to that, we have to understand how they are distorting what actually counts as evidence. And before I go into this, let me give you an analogy, which I think is useful here. Consider the word theory. Okay? The word theory has one meaning in colloquial usage, and it has another meaning in the world of science. In science, when the term theory is used, we're talking about a group of propositions that explain facts or explain some real-world phenomena. For example, the theory of evolution. That is a very specific meaning in the world of science. But the word theory in popular culture, in colloquial usage, has a different meaning. And theory in colloquial usage often actually means what in science is called a hypothesis, which is, it's sort of like a starting point, or it's a possibility. It's one of many possibilities for explaining something in the real world. And one of the things that the American right wing loves to do is, for example, in the context of climate change, deliberately misstate or flip between definitions of what they mean by theory. They'll just deliberately distort the definition of theory by switching back and forth between the scientific definition and the colloquial usage, which really means hypothesis. They'll say, you know, a theory about climate change, a theory is just one of 20, 30, or 40 different explanations about what's going on. Well, hold on a second. That may be what it means in colloquial usage, but when science calls something a theory, it has a different meaning. Now let's go back to this evidence thing, bearing in mind this analogy from theory hypothesis. All along, Republicans have said there is no evidence for anything in the Russia probe. There is no evidence of any quid pro quo in the Ukraine fiasco. Sometimes they'll also use the word hearsay. They'll say it's all hearsay. What they mean is no one has been caught on video in a cartoonish, out of the movies sort of red-handed way that satisfies them as irrefutable proof. But here's the really important thing. Sworn testimony is evidence. William Taylor, the United States envoy to Ukraine, provided sworn testimony to lawmakers where he says there is no question that Donald Trump was withholding aid in order to try to get Ukraine to smear Joe Biden and Hunter Biden publicly. So now the Trumpists are coming in and they're saying, hold on a second. What William Taylor says is not evidence, it's merely hearsay, which is also the wrong word, but let's forget that for now. We're not going to get into hearsay right now. Sworn testimony is evidence. Sworn testimony is evidence made under oath or affirmation under penalty of perjury. Now, someone could give sworn testimony and be lying. Someone could give sworn testimony and not remember the facts correctly. But when the right says there is no evidence, that's either a lie or an ignorant understanding of what evidence means. The testimony is evidence. But here's where the theory versus hypothesis thing comes back to be useful. They're also using evidence interchangeably with proof. This is the other game that they're playing. William Taylor giving evidence that Donald Trump withheld aid in a quid pro quo for Joe Biden to be smeared is not irrefutable proof that that took place, and that's okay. But what they are often saying when they say there is no evidence is that it is not irrefutable proof, which is a completely different standard. It's a completely different issue. So now understanding this, all of this relates to the total and complete lack of critical thinking and epistemology skills in our society, which I have been sounding the alarm about for years at this point. When people understand how arguments are made, when people understand how to figure out for themselves if the words being used to describe things are the most accurate and precise words that could be used, you can't trick people like this. The climate change theory hypothesis games, the games around what counts as evidence versus proof, you can only get traction with distortions and lies. You can only confuse people semantically when people don't have the skills to think these things through for themselves. And that's really the tragedy. That's really the saddest thing of all about the status quo of American just ability to think critically. Now, some last thoughts about the substance of the testimony from William Taylor, the U.S. envoy to Ukraine, just to kind of come full circle and do at least some small analysis of that, although it doesn't really warrant much of an analysis because we know what's going on. Number one, the testimony is truly devastating to the Trump narrative because everyone involved who has given testimony, including testimony about their knowledge of that Trump phone call with the Ukrainian president, even Mick Mulvaney, without realizing it, without meaning to, everyone is confirming elements of the story that the aid was contingent upon the smears of Joe Biden. Now, after the fact, they'll deny it. They'll try to go back and, again, play semantic games about the definitions of the words that they used, but that is the trend. Everybody's confirming the original story, even if they don't mean to. Secondly, this also seems to have jump-started Fox News back into state media mode, where, we've talked about there have been recently some disagreements between Fox News and Donald Trump on some minor issues. The last 24 hours, the testimony from William Taylor has completely restarted Fox News' narrative around the entire Ukraine thing as a nothing burger. It's all a smear attempt against Donald Trump. It's all a witch hunt, etc. They covered this story about William Taylor's testimony as if the testimony from William Taylor is obviously not credible and suggests that the Trump witch hunt narrative is the correct one, which, imagine being that disconnected from reality that that's your takeaway. And again, to go back to the conversation between Donald Trump and the Ukrainian president, the excerpt that was released, they initially said it was a transcript. Then they said, well, it's not a transcript, it's a summation. In reality, it was a partial transcript. Trump released that, believing that it vindicated him. Anyone who, again, can think for themselves, can apply basic critical thinking and epistemology skills to a document and not be swayed by the story that Donald Trump tells you about it, you realize that that partial transcript is extraordinarily damning when it comes to Donald Trump's involvement in this quid pro quo. We will see what the future is of this entire thing. I know that there are people in the audience who, from a practical perspective, are saying, listen, David, I know you're right. And it's not just you that's saying it. It's anybody who analyzes the evidence understands what it is that took place here, but it is going to be hard to get Trump on it. And I don't disagree with you. And that's why all of these investigations, all of these discussions, they need to be properly contextualized in. Let's use them to motivate voters to go out and vote for someone other than Donald Trump, because the most likely scenario, I know that there are other paths, the most likely scenario is none of this stuff will forcefully remove Trump from office, but if we play it correctly, if we talk about it in the right way, it will motivate voters to go out on November, whatever the date is, early November 2020, and say, no more, I'm voting for somebody else. Let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter at @dpakman. The show is on Twitter @DavidPakman Show.